Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, it's time to return to those thrilling days of yesteryear when men were men, the women were strong, and the children were all above that. Okay, where did I get all those from?
The guide, Garrison Keeler.
That was the last one.
Yeah, the last
Boys and girls of all ages. That was the big top. Back in the 50s. Those thrilling days of yesteryear.
The Lone Ranger?
The Lone Ranger. There. Pretty smart group.
Even back in those days, you did say it, I heard you guys lived
No,
back
just an old group with good memory.
Before that.
Yes, there was actually human life back in those days.
That's all I can remember the trivia.
Did anyone know who Tom Mix was?
Oh, Mix, oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Today is Sunday, August 5th, which means next month is September.
And we can only look at the possibility of every Rosh Hashanah. And that tree is getting taller.
Yes, it is.
I didn't have to teach this class, you know. But
You've already lost control.
I know.
Haven't even done it.
It's Bible Prophecy Lesson number 187, NIBIRU and the Wrath of God. We'll review Lesson 186, got a few scriptures of the day, and then we'll look into the possibility that there really is a NIBIRU and that it is associated with the wrath of God. Particularly when you look at the possibility that it came by here during the time of the Egyptian captivity of Israel, when they left Egyptian captivity, and all the events surrounding that, the plagues and everything, you can make an argument that they came from a close encounter with a large body in our solar system. So we'll look at that possibility. And so before we do that, we'll open the class with a word of prayer. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, our creator and maker, and the one in whom we live and move and have our being. And we're grateful for another day, another opportunity to gather here as a group, study these things that you've left for us to find, and to reinforce our faith, because we see that the times are growing short. And we hope that we have interpreted all your words correctly, and that in the very near future we can see you coming on the clouds of heaven. So just put a legion of angels around each one in this study. Keep us safe and keep our faith strong until we see you coming on the clouds of heaven. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, lesson 186. We found evidence in Velikovsky's book, Worlds in Collision, that the plagues of Egypt weren't just localized, they were all over the world. There are places, the Mayas, for example, recall when water in their place turned to blood. The mountains in varying parts spewed blood coming out of the springs because apparently the whole world was overlaid with a thin dust layer of red iron oxide. And Emanuel Velikovsky reports that during this time, Venus came into the solar system and appeared to eject itself from the planet Jupiter. Probably what that means was, as NIBIRU came into the solar system, one of its outermost satellites was probably Venus. And as it came in close contact with Jupiter, it was pulled out of orbit of the NIBIRU planetary system and put into our system, where it roamed around for years as a battering ram, came in close contact with the Earth at least twice. There were huge sparks generated by the close contact. And then finally, Venus went into orbit, close orbit around the sun. Now, the evidence that Venus was an outside intruder is pretty evident because it rotates in exactly the opposite direction of all the other planets. And as you know, from what we understand at least about planetary physics, when the planets are formed, the whole solar system was of dust and small particles, and it was all in the, everything was rotating in the same plane. And then as the planets condensed, they developed a spin, an angular momentum that was inherent in all particles in the solar system at that time, but not Venus. And Velikovsky made the notion that, well, Venus was a comet, and over time it lost its cometary characteristics, and meaning that it lost its tail. But now scientists have examined Venus very closely, and it does indeed have a tail. It's just can't see it unless you have a telescope or some other means of amplifying the light. So Velikovsky's argument is a credible one. It's based not upon astronomy, but upon the legends and myths of varying civilizations. And they all have a similar story to tell. And as some people have said, a myth can neither be generated nor destroyed. It came from something. Somebody had an experience, and it became mythology to some and history to others. So along with Venus, there was another cometary or planetary system, and it was called Typhon, and Typhon exhibits all of the characteristics that we have heard about in modern times associated with Nibiru. And therefore, I believe Typhon was probably the first time that in human history that we observed a binary of our sun coming into the solar system and wreaking havoc. Any questions about Emanuel Velikovsky? Very interesting book, yeah.
So I read something on the planar concept of our solar system versus the fact that if our solar system or our universe is expanding, that our planets are not orbiting on a singular plane, but they're actually doing more of a helical orbit as we expand through the universe from the center. Mm-hmm. That as they're going around, we're expanding, so you're not really rotating on a singular plane, but you're rotating in somewhat of an auger or a screw pattern as you expand from the center of the universe. And I'm wondering how that would, because obviously astronomers have determined that the orbits of our planets are very consistent to the point where they can come up with formulas to pinpoint.
Yeah, Kepler's law shows us where they're going to be in the future, and they've been pretty good up to this point, up until the turn of this first century.
But I'm just wondering what kind of impact that movement through space would have in their orbital path, as well as something that's going through our solar system and coming back around, like a Planet X or a Typhon or something like that, how that expanse would.
I don't know, but it's pretty obvious that there are a lot of things in orbital mechanics that we're not familiar with yet. We haven't got a good handle on. Mm-hmm. But we do have a good handle on gravitation and its effect on planets. Yeah. Because of Kepler's law, that allows us to locate stars, and not stars, but planets in their orbits around the sun. And that is how NIBIRU, or Planet X, came into to being, at least in the minds of astronomers. It's because those outermost planets, Neptune and Pluto, as they would reach a certain point in their orbit, same place, they were being pulled down. Their orbits were changing, and it was a significant change. And so everybody, starting around 1900, began to postulate that there is another planetary system out there, but nobody could see it. And so along came the chief astronomer of the Naval Observatory, a guy named Robert S. Harrington. And he began to take this seriously because he could see it himself. And so He ran 170,000 computer runs to try to identify this thing and determine where it was, how large it was, and when it might come into the center of our solar system. His work, of course, he died in the recent past, and his work was poo-pooed by NASA and everybody. They said, no, he wasn't doing anything. There's nothing to it, nothing to see here, move along. Well, yeah, there was, and he made some observations. And we're going to check into those later today. And it turns out his observations were pretty darn close to what we can observe in the terms of what appears to be NIBIRU today.
Carl, one other point. There were two other, I guess you would call them astronomical events. One was it 701 BC when
This is
there was
true.
a mighty army that was wiped out. There was a giant exchange of energy between, I guess it was the
It
Earth
was
and
Mars, the Earth and Mars. Apparently Mars got knocked out of its orbit too, a long time ago. And it's highly elliptical in its orbit originally. And it came close enough to the Earth that the observers on the Earth could determine it had moons. And it came close enough at one time, according to mythology again, that there was an electrical discharge between Mars and the Earth, and it came so close that there was an energy transfer between the Earth and Mars. What happened was the Earth gained some energy, and Mars lost some energy, which pushed its elliptical orbit back into circular, and it changed our calendar from 360 days to 365.242.
except for the banks.
Except for the banks, yes. But,
When we calculate it.
but this happened in 701 BC, and we know it happened, something happened, because all calendars all over the world before that were 360 days per year. And all calendars after 701 BC were 365 days, 0.242 days per year. So something serious happened in the recent past. And but once again, you don't hear about that in history, do you? Because history is his story, whoever his is.
So the other event that I was thinking of was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where it rained down fire and brimstone. And is that referred to as hail as well, just like it was in the plague story? I don't recall. But I was wondering.
No, I don't ever recall the term fire. Fire was used, but not brimstone. And if you've seen on the Science Channel on the internet, they had a study. They found a planisphere, which was, you know what that is? It was a circular disk showing various constellations around the Earth and a intervening, apparently a meteor that went through the sky around the time of Hezekiah's issue. That, well, I'm sorry, not Hezekiah. Well, when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. But they postulate that this thing came down and hit in a region somewhere around Vienna, Austria, and kicked up a huge firestorm of, well, what you can only call is firestorm of, fire and brimstone. And it rained back down upon the region of Palestine, namely Sodom and Gomorrah, and destroyed them. So that was an interesting find, because the planisphere was the first evidence they found that there was an actual meteor strike sometime in the ancient past, and it was recorded. And I think the Chinese recorded it also. Chinese are pretty good about keeping records of things going on in the sky. Any other questions or observations? But like I say, the evidence that I'm presenting here regarding NIBIRU is on the internet. It comes from sources. We don't know how credible they are, but why? The reason that I bring it up at all is because the consistency between their observations and what we're going to expect to see by virtue of the Revelation account of end time events, they are very, very close indeed. There's a lot of things that just made sense to me. Maybe they don't make sense to you, but I'll give you the evidence, and you make up your own mind. Iran explodes in protest over economic conditions. Iran, the screws are getting tighter over there. There are people going over there and says, no to Gaza, no to Lebanon, my life for Iran. These people are trying to make Iran great again. They don't want to go to Gaza. They don't want to waste their resources on these forays in the Middle East that their leadership wants. This is a big problem to their leadership. If they want to remain in power, they cannot tolerate a sanction by the United States. Look for some time this month for there to be some negotiations going on, either under the table, behind the table, or maybe right out in the open to resolve this dilemma. And look for there to be, at the first part of September, some indication that Iran is willing to negotiate, maybe change things. So, and if that happens, hold on to your seat. But of course, the rest of the world, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own laws, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since our fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. And it's just ignorance. You know, there are people who, how can you have any faith in the Bible at all and negate about a third of it, which is prophecy? And of that third that is prophecy, the richest part of it has yet to be fulfilled. And that which is prophesied to be fulfilled, according to the Jewish understanding of time, we are at the end of the age called the Olam Hazeh. It's been 6,000 years roughly since Adam. So we would expect things like the Revelation account to come to fruition really soon. And if that be true, the church has got to get out of here. We cannot be here during that time. Mutually exclusive events. Because the wrath of God is coming, the church cannot participate in the wrath of God because the church is the body of Christ who already went through the wrath of God in our behalf. We got to get out of here. There is a mechanism. It's called the wrath. Now, this one, we're going to be talking about a few of the scriptures in the Revelation account. And you need to know what the Revelation account is an account of. Reading in Revelation chapter 1, John, both your brother and your companion in tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the island that is called Patmos, for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet. Now, I've listened to a lot of people comment on Revelation. One of them says, "It's in the Spirit on the Lord's day." Well, that was on Sunday. No, it's the Spirit of the day of the Lord. That is an equivalent to that Greek wordage. So it's important to understand that when we talk about the events of Revelation, we're talking about the day of the Lord. Now, the day of the Lord is mentioned lots of places in the Old Testament. We'll go over a few of those. Then we'll go over a few of what we expect to see in the day of the Lord in the Revelation account, and then we'll put them together with what we can expect if there is a rogue planetary system that's red coming into our system and messing things. So we need to understand that the wrath of God and the day of the Lord are synonymous. They are both the same, because the wrath of God is expressed during the day of the Lord. So when you see those two terms, we're talking about the same event. For this is the day of the Lord God of hosts, a day of vengeance, that he may avenge himself on his adversaries. And the sword shall devour and shall be satiated and made drunk with their blood. For the Lord God of hosts has a sacrifice in the north country by the river Euphrates. We're in the region of the Middle East now where this is expected to occur. And to whom is it directed? his adversaries. Is it directed at the church? No. We are not adverse to the Lord. Therefore, if you want to use logic, we are not a part of his vengeance. We are going to witness it, but we are not the objects of it. Joel chapter 2, that's a pretty popular one. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm in my holy mountain, and let the inhabitants of the planet or the land tremble. For the day of the Lord is coming, for it is at hand, and I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. And the sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. We've seen the blood moon situation in the recent past. We've had blood moons show up strangely on Jewish holy days, and then we've just had the largest or longest blood moon in the century that just happened. And the sun is going to be turned into darkness. Now, if you had to turn the sun into darkness, what kind of mechanics are involved with that? Well, you could argue maybe a volcanic eruption, put a lot of smoke in the air, or maybe the moon. Maybe they had an eclipse, and that would turn the land into darkness. But here's the dilemma. When the plagues of Egypt came, there was darkness for 3 days and 3 nights. How do you make the sun go out for 3 days and 3 nights? Well, you put a big angel right up there in front. And he just steps right there and holds it.
Well, theoretically, you can't have a blood moon and a darkened sun, because to have an eclipse, a lunar eclipse, would be the earth between the sun and the moon, which would turn it red, right?
It depends on now. If we're talking a blood moon, if we're having an eclipse of the sun, yeah, you can't, because you can't see the moon because it's between you and the sun. So that's mutually exclusive there. So you can't have a blood moon and the sun turning to darkness by virtue of the moon.
God has a great big switch.
Yep, that's it. Well, hey, when I was reading this 40 or more years ago, that was my determination, that there was no mechanics involved here. Just God works a miracle, whenever you got meteorites hitting the planet, well, they got angels up there with rocks, just throwing them down. And that was good enough for me, God can do that. But isn't it more interesting the way God seems to work? He has, when he put this whole system into motion, had in his mind the end from the beginning. And he put this planet out there and created it so that you can't see it until the exact right time in history. Nobody knew this thing was out there, or even postulated it was out there, until the early 1900s. And the reason that nobody knew it was out there was because we didn't have telescopes that could see and understand our solar system, that we have planets, that they orbit the sun, and that they should have very predictable orbits from Kepler's laws. And then when we find out that some of these planets are violating the law, well, there's got to be a reason for it. And, one thing leads to another, until here we are, and we believe we understand what's going on. Our sun has a binary. It's out there. It's got at least 6 planets in orbit around it. And, let's move on. But one point I just wanted to make is that if you're going to turn the sun into darkness for any appreciable period of time, you have to have an intervening solar mass of some kind. There has to be a mass of some kind between you and the sun. That's the way God's going to do it. For the day of the Lord hosts shall come down upon everything proud and lofty, upon everything lifted up shall be brought low, and upon the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon the oaks of Bashan, and upon the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower and every high wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish and all the beautiful sloops. And the loftiness of men shall be bowed down, the haughtiness of men shall be brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. But the idols he shall utterly abolish, and they shall go to the holes of the rocks and the caves of the earth, from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake the earth mightily. Anybody see something interesting there? People who are going to know, these are going to be the people who are in the know. And if they know what's coming, what are they likely to do? I want to build myself a hole in the ground because anything on the surface of this planet is going to get pounded. And I ain't going to be here, and the rest of them, ha ha ha, they're just going to get pulverized. And then we'll have a new world order.
That's been canceled.
New world order has been canceled from lack of interest? Yes. In that day, man will cast away his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made, each for himself to worship, to the moles and the bats, to go into the clefts of the rock and in the crags of the rugged rocks, from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake the earth mightily. We're going to have a shaking of the earth. Now, God can just take his hands and shake it if he wants to. But the interesting thing is, the people have an advanced warning of the event that is going to cause them to want to go underground. What does this tell you? There's a cosmic disturbance out there which is visible to mankind. Is that reasonable? Reasonable to me. Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand and will come as destruction from the Almighty. For therefore all hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them, and they shall be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames, and some of their faces will be on fire. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. He will destroy sinners from it. For the stars of the heaven and their constellations, that literally means Orion, will not give their light. The sun will be darkened from its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. This sounds to me like we have got an intervening mass between the sun and the earth. Would that not cause the event described? And I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for the wicked for their iniquity, and I will halt the arrogance of the proud and lay low the haughtiness of the terrible, and I will make a mortal, that's a man or a woman, more rare than fine gold, and a man more than a golden wedge of Ophir. Ophir is a place where they found gold, by the way. So we've got events here that if you were to look for a natural occurrence visible in the sky that man would know in advance is about to come upon him, that would cause the sun to be darkened and darken the moon alike, you got to have an intervening mass of some kind between the earth and the sun. And I looked up, and he opened the sixth seal. Now we're in the seal judgments. For those of you who are unfamiliar, there are 3 sets of 7 judgments. In Revelation, there are 7 seals, there are 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. The 7 seals unleash, the 7 trumpets announce, and the 7 bowls pour out the wrath of God. This is just getting started, the end of the seal judgments. And he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree who drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Oh, we've got meteors involved in the seal judgment. And then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. The sky receded as a scroll rolled up. What happens if we come in close contact with a highly magnetic planetary system?
Flip out.
The poles, if it's coming, how does it come? It comes up from the south, and as it comes up, it's entirely possible that our poles will lock onto each other, and as it passes by, the Earth's going to want to follow that pole, and your planet's going to turn over. And what happens? Well, according to the scientists that I've read, claim to be scientists anyway, when such an event happens, the planet turns over faster than the sky can follow it, or the atmosphere. So what happens? You develop a big roll. The sky literally rolls up. That which is on the top goes to the bottom. What's on the top? Cold air, really cold air. Why was it that the mammoths were found quick frozen and had in their mouths in Siberia buttercups that don't grow in Siberia? And why were the mammoths' clothes or hair designed not to hold in heat, but to let it escape? It's because they were tropical animals. And when the world turned over, which I believe it did during the Egyptian captivity release, that is the mechanism why it caused them to be quick frozen. The sky turned over and it quick froze them, yeah.
It seemed to be tremendous winds. If you have tremendous winds, if you have something moving and the sky is still there, I mean.
Yeah, it's going to move hundreds of miles an hour.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a literal horizontal vortex, a tornado, tornadic winds, probably 400 or 500 miles an hour. It's going to be awful. And so, yeah.
But this, the seal judgments, will not happen while we're here.
Exactly right, because these are God's manifestation of his wrath. And this is at the end, almost 1/3 of them have passed now at this point in time. And so we're going to have, yeah.
So you're saying this happened back at the time of the Exodus?
I'm saying that a very similar event happened back in those days. If the planet was turned upside down, if it wasn't during the Exodus, it may have been one of the previous trips through the cosmos of Nibiru.
So if all that wind was taking place, what would happen to the people back then?
Well, they would have got it too. So you make a good argument that it didn't flip over on its axis at that time. But at some time in the past it did. I don't know what the age of the mammoths were, but it offers a mechanism for the fact that you could find an animal that's been there thousands of years, quick frozen, and I mean, you can eat the meat. In fact, they have meat in Moscow. Khrushchev and was it Nixon? Maybe it was Eisenhower. I don't remember, but I remember the Russians served mammoth meat to our president at one time in the past. So the meat was good. And if you talk to the people that specialize in freezing meat, they say that you got to have a temperature of like 150 degrees below zero and a wind speed of 100 miles an hour to freeze a carcass of the size of a mammoth to the point where the meat does not putrefy. So that tells us something happened. Now, it may not have been the time of the Exodus, but it could have been a previous.
Sodom and Gomorrah, maybe you're talking about.
Well, Sodom and Gomorrah is an entirely different mechanism. That can be explained by just a meteor strike.
Well, Answers in Genesis talks about the Ice Age.
Hmm?
Answers in Genesis talks about the Ice Age, and they've got a great argument for it.
Yeah. So the point being here is, when we're going over these Revelation events, you can see in them a mechanism in NIBIRU to fulfill this. The moon becoming like blood and all, and the fact, well, now look who it is that the first characters that run to these holes in the ground. The kings of the earth, the great men, the mighty men, the rich men, the commanders, every slave, every free man, they hid themselves in the caves and the rocks and the mountains. Well, the slaves, they don't get a very good deal because they're not mentioned first. But these rich guys, well, does anybody see the movie? What was it called? I can't remember the name of it now. It was where that they had to prepare these ships up in the mountains of
2012.
China. Was that 2012? Yeah, that was 2012. Yeah. Notice that all the rich people in the world had a ticket that they had to buy to get on one of these ships because they knew something was coming and only the rich guys and powerful were going to get out. And so when the time came, they all got their word and they all flew over to China and got on their boats. Some of the boats worked, some of them they didn't remember the story. But the point is, it was the rich and the powerful that made plans to get out. The rest of you, hope you can swim. And they said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits upon the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Nobody. Nobody can stand. And if you, just envision for a moment that this big planetary system shows up, and you're running through the tail of it, and the planet is getting pounded from stem to stern with meteorites, and you never know where they're coming or where they're going to land. Imagine the chaos. And imagine the hopelessness to those who have put their faith in the world system.
You can run, but you can't hide.
You can dig really deep,
Doesn't matter.
but guess what happens when you get real close? It says in the account that all of the mountains are going to be leveled and all of the plains, the valleys filled up. The planet is going to be entirely different in geography. And what does that mean? It doesn't matter if you've got a 2,000-foot hole in the ground. You just got a deeper grave. Now, there is a deep underground military base located beneath the Denver airport. It's over 22 miles in diameter and goes down 8 levels. It's no coincidence that the CIA has relocated the headquarters of its domestic division, which is responsible for the operations in the United States, from CIA's Langley headquarters to Denver. Constructed in 1995, the government and politicians were hell-bent on building this airport in spite of its ending up vastly over budget. Charges of corruption, constant construction company changes, and mass firings of teams once they had built a section of their work was reported so that no one group had any idea of what the blueprint of the airport really was. You go up there today and you ask to see level 8 underneath the airport, they'll say, oh no, that's for baggage handling and we can't show you that. It's busy down there.
Well, what's the source of that?
The source of that, oh, I wish I would have written it down. I'll find out. You just go into the internet and type in the Denver airport. There are so many strange things about the Denver airport that it's, and you'll notice nobody in the mainstream media thinks this is a story. And you know why? Because the mainstream media is owned by the rich and the powerful. They decide what the news is, except they're having a hard time right now.
Well, and they consider themselves part of the elite.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what's near Denver Airport, the military?
What's that?
Cheyenne Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
They track,
Cheyenne Mountain's in Colorado Springs.
they track every golden state.
Everything from there, and then there is another theory that Cheyenne Mountain is tied into this tunneling system that's throughout the government, throughout the country. Anyway, a secret apocalypse bunker buried beneath Denver Airport as the United States prepares for the end of days. It's almost as if the government built this airport with some sort of information that we don't know about, that something bad is going to happen in the near future. I wonder what that might be. Why, it's if the planners and the builders of the airport were on purpose trying to create a place of hopelessness, confusion, and outer darkness. Yeah.
You find that word apocalypse.
Apocalypse literally means unfolding. We associate it with bad events. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse literally means the 4 horsemen of the unfolding. The unfolding being the wrath of God, literally. So anytime you see the word apocalyptic or apocalypse, we're generally talking about bad news, big bad news. So here's one, you can find this on the internet if you want to look for it, but there is a claim that Denver Airport, Cheyenne Mountain, all of these areas are linked together by an underground tunnel. You can make an argument that, well, the black projects over the last 40 or 50 years are somewhere between $6 and $8.5 trillion over budget, and nobody will tell you where that money went. Congress can't even find out where it went. There's an argument that says, well, where it went was digging tunnels. And there are tunnels under everywhere. Remember that certain places of the U.S. on the east and west side, people were complaining about this incessant hum that's in their areas. There's a hum going on. It's driving us all nuts. It seems to be coming from the ground. Tunneling machines. They were down there building tunnels all over the place. And that's where your trillions of dollars went. So,
That's why we're in such debt right now.
what's that?
That's why we're in debt.
Well, that's one of the reasons. And why don't you think that the government and the powers that be are worried about our debt? Because they figure in a few years, there won't be any reason to worry about anything because everything is going to be wiped out. And they're going to survive in their tunnels and they'll come out to a brand new world. And the rest of you all, well, you make great compost. Here is a mural on the dome. Yes.
No, I was just gonna tell you, we're allowed to call down fire into it.
Yeah.
Huge here, underground. Just
Oh, yeah.
huge, yeah, and nobody can go in.
Very interesting. Well, these are the bizarre murals on the Denver airport walls. I mean, would you put a picture like that in your house? You've got things burning up,
Well, yeah, I guess.
children looking just
Terrified.
scared to death. It's just, you can look, and this one is looking up in the air as though something evil were coming.
A leopard, is that a dead leopard laying?
Yeah, the dead leopard is laying there. And a dead turtle, too.
Yeah.
Animals are dead, the turtles are dead.
Turtles-
Something came from the sky, the forest is on fire.
Look at the child on the right hand side.
Yeah, you can see, there's a dead child in a coffin. Here is a woman, I guess, clutching her valuables. Here's a dead turtle, there's a dead leopard. Oh, they got a bird in a box, looks like the bird's
And
still
a penguin
alive.
in a box.
And a penguin in a box.
Another bird in a box.
But these look like, these are just maybe statues of a bygone era because they're all gone now. Oh, okay, here's one that really looks good. I would really like to have this one on my wall.
Oh, yeah.
What do you got there? A guy in a gas mask, looks like a Nazi, carrying a gun with a bayonet fixed, and he just killed a double piece.
Yeah.
Wow. I sure wish I had that mirror. And you can see the burnt out building over on the right, and people with one with a dead baby over here.
One
And,
positive thing, looks like there's a big wall in that picture.
yeah, big wall. Yeah, sort of.
I wonder if we're gonna get a wall.
Maybe we'll get a wall.
What's the point of that?
Hey, that's the point. What is the point? Why in the world would you allow somebody to make this? And there's another one. Dead girl in a car. I like this one. There's a gargoyle in distress on his suitcase.
No, that's just a picture of a traveler.
Oh,
Demonic. Demonic.
do you think?
I'm not flying out of Denver anymore.
Okay, moving right along in Revelation chapter 8, and I saw 7 angels who were standing before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Now we're in 7 trumpet judgments. And another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar, and he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before his throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God and from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer filled with fire from the altar and threw it to the earth, and there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood. Where have we heard that before? They were thrown to the earth, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. And then a second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. Oh, we got an asteroid collision here, sounds like to me. And 1/3 of the sea became blood. Why did it become blood? Because this thing was full of iron oxide. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and fell upon 1/3 of the rivers and upon the springs of waters. And the name of the star was Wormwood, which in the Russian language is Chernobyl. And many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Does it sound to you like the plagues of Egypt? Then the fourth angel sounded, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, and 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of them were darkened, and 1/3 of the day did not shine, likewise the night. And I looked and I heard an angel flying through the midst of the heavens saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth because of the remaining blast of the trumpet of the angels who are to sound. And then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the seven angels, go and pour out the bowls. Now we're in the bowl judgment of wrath upon the earth. So I went, and the first poured out his bowl upon the earth, and foul and loathsome sores came upon men who had the mark of the beast and who had worshipped his image. What happened during the Egyptian plagues? Boils. Then the second angel poured out his bowl on the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man. Well, apparently this red iron oxide dust has something in it other than just rust, because it kills everything it seems to get a hold of. Became like the blood of a dead man, and everything in the sea died. That's grim. You talk about a stinking mess. Yeah, how would you like to be? Then a third angel poured out his bowl and on the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. Once again, perfectly consistent with an envelope of dust of red iron oxide over the planet. And I heard the angels of the water saying, you are righteous, O Lord, the one who is and who was and who is to be, because you have judged these things. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink, for it is their just due. Exactly like the plagues of Egypt. Then I heard another from the altar saying, even so, Lord God mighty, and true and righteous are you. Then a fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was given to him power to scorch men with fire. Well, you can imagine the best estimates on the minimum size of a brown dwarf sun is roughly 40% of the diameter of the sun. What is the diameter of the sun? 1 million miles. The diameter of this thing is roughly 400,000 miles. This is the red center, the NIBIRU brown dwarf. It's roughly 400,000 miles. When it comes on its orbit, well, when we get this, and men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, who has power over the plagues, for they did not repent and give him glory. Then the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongue in their pain. And the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and with a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, it is done. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and there was a great earthquake. Such a mighty and great earthquake has not occurred since men were on earth. Now the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God to give her his cup of wine of fierceness and wrath. Then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, and great hail from heaven fell upon men. Each hailstone weighed about 100 pounds. Men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, since the plague was exceedingly great. One of the technicians who reported on YouTube, who claimed to have seen NIBIRU coming through the space telescope, reported that it has surrounding it a huge cloud of stuff. Some of it grains of red dust, some of it, he said, looked to be stones about 100 pounds in weight. Big chunks of iron floating around this thing. So, when you pass through the tail of this thing, some of the people on the internet speculate it's about 1 million miles wide. It's going to take the Earth about a day to pass through it. What does that mean? As the Earth turns around, every side of the Earth is going to get exposed to this thing. It is going to pound the Earth's surface. Anything that's on there that's alive is going to be dead. I mean, unless you just get real lucky, you're not going to survive this. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stones. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 diadems upon his heads. We've seen this sign. The woman clothed with the sun, moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars is a particular sign of the constellation Virgo. there's only one time in the last 2,000 years in which the sign of Virgo has 12 stars over its head, clothed with the sun, and the moon is under her feet. And when was that? September 23rd, 2017. That we thought was Rosh Hashanah, and we thought we were out of here. But guess what? It wasn't Rosh Hashanah, because I was out and I was looking. It was the day or two after Rosh Hashanah. But the interesting thing is, she was in pain to give birth to a child. And it says there was another sign, a great fiery dragon. This fiery dragon has 7 heads. Isn't it interesting that the NIBIRU planetary complex has a center sun, which is red, at least in the infrared spectrum it's red. I think in the visible light it's red also. And it's surrounded by 6 planets, total of 7 heads. Just an accident, I'm sure. There's Virgo, September 23rd, 2017, surrounded by 12 stars, clothed with the sun, moon under her feet. One day. Gives us an indication of what time we're in. If this were the beginning of the tribulation event, and John was there commentating, well, tribulation must not be very far away. And it said the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour a child. As soon as it was born, and she bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And then the woman flees to the wilderness. This child, we always thought was Christ. It's not. It's the church, because he delegated to the church in the admonition to the church at Thyatira that whoever keeps his word, I will give them to rule over the nations with a rod of iron. That's the church. The word caught up, that is the Greek word harpazo, which is in Latin rapier or rapio, which is where we get our word rapture. So this is the rapture of the church. At what time is it? Well, you know, when you see that sign, it's not far off. And what's the next event that you've got? You've got to see this red dragon. So the man-child of Revelation chapter 12 is the church. The church was conceived on Pentecost 33 AD and was born September 23rd, 1917? Actually, that's 2017. I'm living in the past. The day after Rosh Hashanah, the church will be caught up, raptured on some near Rosh Hashanah. According to the signs, the next sign to be is the red dragon appearing before the woman Virgo and preparing to destroy her child. This may be already fulfilled. Because, you heard me talk about Robert S. Harrington. He saw this thing from computer calculations. He knew about where it was, about how fast it was traveling. He knew it was at a 30-degree angle from the ecliptic, in other words, the plane of the planets. It's coming up from the south. That's why we have a South Pole infrared telescope, because it's coming down there. You wouldn't put it on the North Pole, you couldn't see it. So they saw it, and when it begins to make its appearance, coming toward the center of our solar system, it will appear as though it's coming from the constellation Libra. Hold that thought. Here is a map of the zodiac. Here is Virgo. Here is Libra. They're pretty close together, aren't they? His guess was it was coming from Libra. He was only off a little bit. This is Google IR. There's Google Sky, and this is the constellation Virgo. You go pull it up.
This is a redaction.
What is that black space there? I can guarantee you, if you look through an infrared telescope, you will not see a black space there. It's covering up something.
Why
Yes.
doesn't that cover up the whole thing?
It's stupid. Why would you do that? You're just making it obvious that you're holding. Now, this is NIBIRU's orbit. And everybody's guessing now where it's going to come. But the point is, it's at a 30-degree angle to the plane of the planets around the sun. And as it comes up from the south, it goes back down and goes back out into deep space. It passes the planets, or the orbit, or the ecliptic of the planets twice. Guessing 7 years apart. The interesting thing, that's NASA IRAS of the Virgo anomaly, which was blacked out on Google Sky. What does that look like to you?
It's raining.
Looks like a giant red face of a dragon to me, doesn't it? Remember that Typhon had 100 heads? You can kind of see chunks of stuff going along with it. Maybe that was their interpretation of this thing when they. Now, there's another picture of it. And once again, it's not any one of these things which makes me believe that it's true. It's the preponderance of the evidence. We know from Matthew chapter 24 that there, just before the end of the tribulation, people are going to see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the heavens. What is his sign? How about a cross with a bloody body in the center of it, surrounded by 6 planets? And the planets, if you draw a line through them, make a cross. The name of NIBIRU is literally the planet of the crossing. That is, I mean, if you want a sign of the coming of the Son of Man, wouldn't that be a pretty good one? A bloody body suspended between on a cross. So here's my summarization of the whole thing. The scriptures, both the Old and the New Testament, refer to the wrath of God coming. All of the events of the wrath of God speak to us of a cosmic disturbance, a massive cosmic disturbance, sufficient enough to disturb the planet Earth, to intervene between the planet Earth and the sun, to cause events on the Earth that are very similar to the events that occurred during the plagues of Egypt. Zachariah Sitchin and Robert S. Harrington both agreed that there is a solar mass out there of sufficient size to disturb the outer planets, and that they speculate that the orbit of this thing is around 3,600 years. It's been 3,550 years since the plagues of Egypt. This thing apparently started and caused the plagues of Egypt. Its second visitation, which will be very short if we have our facts correct, will visit upon us all of the events recorded in the Revelation account and in the prophecies of the Old Testament. And because we can now see it through a telescope, this may be sufficiently known to fulfill the requirement of the Revelation 12 account of the dragon being visible, because we can see it, though not with our naked eye, but with our telescopes and infrared imaging devices. So my point is this may be all we see of this thing. Yeah.
So if the Earth is wiped out and everything, where are we going to get all these telescopes and everything to be able to see it?
Well, it has not come close to the Earth yet at all. And when it gets close, at least at the 7-year end of the tribulation point, when it becomes the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, it's going to be, in my estimation, it's going to look like it's going to collide with the Earth. And for all intents and purposes, everybody on planet Earth believes it's going to collide, because the scripture says that unless God intervenes, no life would have survived. In other words, it's going to get hit. So apparently it's coming right at planet Earth, and everybody on planet Earth now throws up their hands. There is no hope, right? We can't get away from this thing. It's going to get us. But to those who put their faith in the Lord, there will be a remnant that survive and get through it. Some have estimated maybe 1% of the planetary population. But why I'm interested in NIBIRU is because it seems to fulfill every requirement of both the Old and New Testament regarding the wrath of God. It's like as if God has created this thing for one purpose, and that purpose is to display to the earth that God is in control. Now, every time God works, he gives you an opportunity. You can believe that you're just out of luck because, well, we just happen to live in a solar system where we're going to get run into by this brown dwarf. or you can believe that there is a God who is in control of this thing, created it there from the beginning of time just for this purpose, and that you who put your faith in him will be saved. All who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. So at that point in time, when this thing becomes obvious and headed right at the earth, there will be those who cry out and call upon the name of the Lord, and they will survive through it. Because there has to be some survivors that go into the millennial reign. So what am I saying? All I'm saying is, look up, because time may be very short. And I hope it's 9/11/2018. Because that's the next Rosh Hashanah after this sign was given.
We've already given you 2 chances, though. The third strike, you're out.
Yeah.
Hey, I like that. I'm out of here in 3 strikes. Huh?
She has to go to Egypt first.
Well,
Yeah, I want a refund.
but does it have to be this year? No, there's nothing that says it absolutely has to be. But of course, there was nothing that said in years past, although signs were there. Didn't have to be then, obviously, although it sure looked like it was. And my belief is that God is preparing us to be ready, because that time is coming. And what is it? Those who put their faith in the Lord, when he returns, get a crown of righteousness. And then those 24 elders that are seen before the throne in John's account, those are me and thee. 24, a completed set. They wear Stephanos, overcomers' crowns. They wear white robes. And they are where the church will be during all of this torment that comes on down here on planet Earth. So be prepared, put your faith in the Lord, you don't have anything to worry about. Yes?
Just a quick note, 4 of us went up to Bill's ranch up in San Saba.
Yeah.
It was Bill, myself, Kenny, and Gil went up there, and remember about a month ago we had that big storm, and he was up part of that time. The huge hail came down in the size just under a softball, pretty good size, and they figured somehow it's about 100 miles an hour, and we were up there all day taking all the tin off of this roof, every roof we had, to destroy it. Now that's only holes that much, yeah, holes. That's it destroyed. Have to take everything out. That's only that big, 100 miles an hour. I can't imagine the speed of NIBIRU stuff. I mean,
Yeah, this 100-pound, just look at these 100-pound chunks of iron falling out of the sky. You know, they got to be doing 400 or 500 miles an hour.
And, yeah, bigger. I mean, this is just that big. It's like ice. That's all it was.
Yeah, I play golf with a guy who is a fisherman, like you,
Good guy.
and they were down at Aransas Pass at 5 o'clock in the morning, I believe he said, and they were putting their boats in, and they heard this, and a meteorite came across and landed about a half a mile from them and started a fire just on the edge of Aransas Pass. And he said it was the scariest thing he ever heard in his life, because this thing made noise. And that's one of the things that the world has to look forward to. You can imagine thunderings, lightning strikes, noise of these things whistling through the atmosphere, and you don't know from one moment to the next if the next one's going to get you or not. That's hell. That's hell on earth.
Real quick,
Yes.
before anyone gets away, if you have any programs